Shalom everyone, hope all is well. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're picking up today in Masechet Sanhedrin. Today's Amud is going to be Chet Amud Bet 8b. But we're going to start from Chet Amud Aleph 8a, where the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Chachamim omrim motzi shem be'esrim v'shlosha. Now, Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to have one section really in our learning today, which is the beginning of a total of 8 explanations. We'll go through the first 4 today. The first 4 of 8 explanations as to what is the basis of debate between Rav Meir and the Rabbanan in the Mishnah. We'll see. And our learning should be, again, as a refuah shlema, a speedy recovery, a full recovery for our good friend Yaakov ben Dina. Let's begin, again, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom of, 6 lines from the bottom of, 5 lines, sorry. 5 lines from the bottom of Chet Amud Aleph. Now before we see this inside, let's just remember what exactly we're talking about over here. This is a fascinating sugya, fascinating halakha in the Torah is like this. You have halakha in the Torah where a man marries a woman, and then after their night together, after the nisuin, means the consummation of the marriage, he enters court claiming that she was not a betula, she was not a virgin girl. And that was the assumption that he had going into marriage. Now, just brief background. This is really a sugya in Masechet Ketuvot, but just quick background to this. There is a halacha when a man marries a woman. There is something called ketuvah, right? The obligations that he owes her, she owes him, etc. One of those obligations is if a man marries a girl who is a betula, a virgin, and then for whatever reason the marriage is ended. Let's say there's divorce or death. She is owed 200 zuz. Okay, it's a certain sum of money. Now, if when they got married initially, she was a be'ula, meaning he knew he was marrying a girl who was not a virgin, she was previously married, so in such a scenario, her ketubah is less, it's 100 zuz. Okay, that's the halacha in general. However, back to our case at hand, man walks into court after nisu'in, and he claims that the girl who was supposed to be a betula was not, she was a be'ula. She was a non-virgin girl. So like this, the Rabbanan say that we give believability to his claim based on a logical assumption, which is he wouldn't put all that effort into having a big wedding and paying for all of the wedding just to throw it away. So therefore he has believability to what he's saying. Now if he is indeed accurate in what he's saying, that she's a be'ula, so that doesn't mean necessarily she was mizaneh, that she strayed and slept with someone else between erusin and nisuin, which I'll explain in a minute, but that it was a mistake, meaning it was a misled situation, and she'll forfeit the ketuvah and she'll be sent, they'll separate. She'll forfeit the ketuvah that she was otherwise owed, if it's true what he's saying. We don't know necessarily that it is. So as the Torah says, that the father of the bride steps in and has to prove that she was a betula, and that goes back and forth. So again, if it's true, but there's no witnesses to back up the fact that she was mizaneh, that she strayed from under him, so she'll forfeit her ketuvah. Now just to remember, back in the day, they would do kiddushin, the first stage of marriage, which created isur, that there was a real eshet ish status, married woman status, and then 12 months later they would do nisuin, the consummation. Today we do both on the same day. We do kiddushin, which is giving the ring, and then we have the nisuin, which is either chuppah, yichud room, etc. But we do both on the same day. So if he's claiming she's not a betula, she'll forfeit her ketuvah, assuming that it's true what he's saying. That is a purely monetary case. Now, there's a more severe potential outcome, which is if he's able to produce witnesses who say they saw or know that with real testimony, she was mizaneh, she strayed from under her husband, slept with a different man between the kiddushin and the nisuin. That means she was an eshet ish, a married woman who was mizaneh. So actually she'll be chayav mita. She'll be punished with skila, with stoning actually. She'll end up receiving the severity of death in court, which is a serious situation, obviously much more serious. This is all assuming that it's true what he's saying. But let's say he's making it up, which the Torah talks about, it's called motzi shem, is that he makes up a negative thing against her, reputation against her, which is not true. And it turns out that he's a liar. He's making this up So he's at fault. What happens now is there's a series of things that happen against him. First of all, he has to pay the father 100 shekel, a certain sum of penalty. Also, I believe the Torah says he gets malkot, and this is very interesting. You have to think about this a little bit, ruminate on this idea. He is forced to marry this girl, and he cannot divorce her for the rest of his life. Meaning, she could say, I don't want to be married to him. But if he's proven to be a liar, and he was just casting aspersions against her that are not true, he doesn't have the ability to send her away. He has to stay married to her. There's a lot to talk about that idea. We're not going to get into that today. But based on this introduction, when we talk about motzi shemra, if the court's adjudicating such a scenario where a man is casting aspersions saying she was not a betula, she was a beula, would this be considered a monetary case, or would this be considered a capital case? So we had a machloket in the Mishnah. We had a Rabbi Meir's position who said motzi shemra, cases of the husband indicting her saying she was not a betula, require 3 judges to adjudicate, like a monetary case. And we had the Chachamim in the Mishnah who argued in Rabbi Meir, and they said you need 23 because this is the words of the Chachamim were Chachamim omrim motzi shemra be'esrim v'shlosha mipnei sheyesh bo dinei nefashot, because it is associated with dinei nefashot, with capital cases. So you need a court of 23 because it's associated with cases of capital cases. Why is that? Because theoretically, if she was mizana and there's witnesses against her, she's chayav mita. So this is a capital case. Now the Gemara assumes at a starting point, it can't be that the case is where the husband said, I have witnesses that she was mizana, she strayed, she slept with someone else during the period between kiddushin and nisuin. Because in that case, everybody would agree you need 23. That's without question, because that's the potent for capital is very real. So Rabbi Meir wouldn't say 3 in such a case. So rather, what must be the case? It must be he does not have witnesses. But if that's true, why would the Chachamim say you need 23? Chaura, the assumption would be that this is then just a purely monetary case. Does she forfeit her ketuvah, or does he have to pay out a penalty? This is a monetary case. So why then would the Chachamim say you need 23 judges in order to adjudicate this case? Now we're going to have 8 answers in total to explain this machloket. Today, Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll begin with the first 4, and we'll continue on tomorrow with the last number of them. So let's see. Let's see the Gemara inside. The Chachamim said motzi shemra, this case where he casts allegation against her that she was not a betula, requires 23 judges. It says because mipnei sheyesh bo, the lashon of the Mishnah was because yesh bo dinei nefashot, because it's associated with dinei nefashot, with capital cases. Says the Gemara, v'chiyesh bo dinei nefashot ma'avi, but the Gemara says, I don't understand. Okay, it's true. There could be a scenario, motzi shemra, that would lead to capital cases, but that's obviously not the case here, because if the case was that he had witnesses with him, that would be a real capital case, and nobody would hold that you need 3. So it must be, what the Mishnah is saying, the Chachamim, it's associated with scenarios that in general could lead to capital. But who cares? That's not the case here, so why do you need 23 judges according to the Chachamim? So Amar Ula explains the first answer, B'chosheshin le'la'az kamifligi. Very interesting debate. The machloket here is, are we concerned about the rumor and the kol, the noise that will be made based on this court case? And the machloket is as follows. According to Rabbi Meir, the witnesses come into court, there's no witnesses. We're not talking about witnesses. Husband comes into court and he starts to make a lot of noise. She's not a betula, she's a beula. That's a monetary case. So Rabbi Meir says, that's it. That's where it begins and that's where it ends. This is purely monetary. We're not worried about the spreading of the rumor, which I'll explain in a moment in the Chachamim. So therefore, all you need is 3, nothing to talk about. The Chachamim say, this is fascinating, the Chachamim say, as the husband is casting these allegations against her, what's going to happen is we're concerned about the rumor that's spreading, or we think about that. And maybe what's going to happen is there are going to be a pair of witnesses somewhere in the world who will hear this rumor that's spread against her. And they'll say, actually, we were witness to her being mizaneh, to her straying from under her husband during that period of kiddushin, and therefore actually this will turn into a capital case when they appear in court tomorrow to testify that she's actually chayav mitah. So since we're concerned about that, you actually need to start with 23 as well. Very interesting logic. Let's see that inside. So the machloket says, Ula is bechoshishin lelaz kamifligi. Are we concerned about this rumor, the narrative spreading, and potentially drawing in witnesses which will make it into a capital case? Rabbi Meir savar in choshishin lelaz. Rabbi Meir says, we're not concerned about that. It is monetary. It's not going, we don't have to worry, maybe it'll turn into capital because witnesses will show up. And therefore, you start with 3 and that's it. But Rabbanan Savri, but the Rabbanan hold, Choshishin Lelaz. We are concerned about it because maybe the rumors will spread, people will hear, and there happens to be 2 witnesses who actually saw her being mizaneh before, and then they'll come and testify. So therefore, start with 23 because it could turn into a capital case, and you want to start then with 23 as well. This is the position of Ula. Rava says a second explanation. He argues on Ula. And Rava says like this. And really the Rabbanan don't hold we're concerned about this rumor. This is not a non-factor. To be so concerned that maybe the rumor will spread and then witnesses will show up turning this into a capital case, that's too far-fetched. That's not something we have to be concerned about. Okay, so what's the point of debate then? The machloket is, are we concerned about the honor of the original judges? What does it mean? Let me explain this outside and we'll see it inside. What happened was the husband showed up in court. Now again, if it was a purely monetary case, he said she wasn't a bitula. This is a pure monetary case. Does she forfeit her ketuvah? Does he owe her money? Everyone agrees that you only need 3. That's not a debate. The Chachamim agree to that. The case over here is, he shows up in court and he says, I have witnesses. I have witnesses. Oh, so now it's capital. 23 judges show up. But then he doesn't produce. The witnesses don't show up. So now you have 23 judges who gathered together because they thought it was a capital case, but now there's no witnesses. So now it's been demoted from capital to monetary. This is a very interesting machloket. The Rabbanan say, we're choshesh for the kavod of those judges. Because since they originally gathered to adjudicate a case, which was then capital, if we would send them all home, it would be disrespectful to them. So they should stay and judge it even as a group of 23, even though now it's a monetary case because you have no witnesses here. Nonetheless, we're concerned about their honor. Ibn Meir says we're not concerned about that. They'd rather go home. We're not concerned for their honor in that case, and therefore you only need 3 now as it's only a monetary case. Says the Gemara, asking, what are we dealing with here? Originally, the husband claimed that it was a capital case because he had witnesses, so they gathered a group of 23 to judge capital case. But then it turned out the witnesses didn't show up, so the judges began to disperse. So the husband then turned to the judges and he said to them, at least adjudicate the monetary case for me. So now, because you don't have witnesses, it's true, it's not a capital case anymore. The Chachamim say, we're concerned about the honor of those judges. If we send them home, it's disrespectful. They gathered, now they're leaving, so they should stay and adjudicate this case so as not to disrespect the Rishonim, the original judges who were here. All 23 of them. Rabbi Meir says we're not concerned about that. They can go home and you can be left with a court of 3 that would be sufficient, as now it is a case of monetary matters. Good. So we have 2 shitot so far. We have Ula and we have Rava. Some say it's Rava actually, but let's go with Rava. That's the Girsa in front of us. Marshal says Rava. But let's explain it outside again one more time. We have this machloket, do you need 3 or 23 when it comes to motzi shemra, to adjudicate this case where the husband's claiming his wife was not a bitula. We have 2 ways to explain the machloket so far. We have Ula who says the machloket is in a scenario, right? The husband came to court saying my wife was a bit beula. She wasn't a virgin. Now the Rabbanan say we're concerned maybe the rumor that's being spread now will attract witnesses, turning it into a capital case, so you should start off with 23. Rameir says we're not concerned about that. That's the position of Ula. Rava says no, the machloket is, in that case, when he just says it's a purely monetary, there's no witnesses at all, everyone agrees we're not worried about laws, and therefore you're not going to have to gather 23 in the beginning, no question. The case over here is where he said that there were witnesses, turned out that there weren't, but you already had gathered a court of 23. So in such a case, the Rabbanan say we're concerned about the honor of those 23, don't send them home. Reb Meir says we're not concerned about that. Turning to Chetem Mud Bet. The Gemara now poses something that's a proof to Rava and a question on Ula. What does the Braita say? So the Braita says like this. Chetem Mud Bet, top of the page. Meiteve, the Gemara poses a question against Ula from this Braita. The Braita says, explaining the position of the Chachamim against Rabbi Meir. But Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say, it's like an addendum to our Mishnah, it's a Tosefta that explains the Chachamim's position. The Chachamim explain, Tav'u mamon, if the husband is claiming money, if it's purely a monetary claim, bishlosha, so then you need 3 judges. Tav'u nefashot, but if he's claiming capital, that there could be death involved, in this case of motzi shemra, the Chachamim say, be'esrim vishlosha, that you would need a court of 23. Now let's analyze this Braita through the lens of Ula and through the lens of Rava. Bishlam Rava, it's understandable according to Rava, the second explanation. How would you explain the claim of money versus the claim of nefashot, and then 3 verses 23? Like this, simple. Tav'u mamon, the case where the husband's claiming money, according to Rava, is tchila, it means in the beginning, meaning if the husband just shows up into court, he doesn't say, I have witnesses with me. So Rava said the Chachamim would concede, that's purely a monetary case. We're not choshesh for laz, and therefore we don't have to be concerned about potentially turning into a capital case. So, bishlosha, you only need a court of 3. The Chachamim concede to that. But the Chachamim also hold, Tav'u nefashot tchila, that if originally he claims that there is witnesses and it's a capital case, afilu mamon, even though those witnesses don't show up, but since we're worried about the honor of the judges, so be'esrim vishlosha, you'll need 23 judges to stay so as to protect their honor. So this fits beautifully in the words and in the position of Rava. But according to Ula, this distinction in the Chachamim does not make sense. Because according to Ula, even if the husband comes in claiming purely monetary case, he doesn't have witnesses, nothing to talk about, still we're worried about laz. Maybe it'll turn into a capital case. So how do we understand then the scenario of 3 verses 23? You always need 23. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, and this is a beautiful thing, Rava, the one who's arguing on Ula, is going to defend Ula's position in face of the question in the Braita. Now you could learn that the previous one who was arguing Ula was Rabbah, but if you learn it's Rava, this what we're about to say shows us the beauty and uniqueness of debates in Torah. You know, if there was a political debate between Trump and Biden, and the moderator asked a question against Biden, even if Trump knew the answer to that question to resolve the position or the political view of Biden, there is no way at all he would ever speak up and say, hey Biden, I'll help you out here and answer that question for you. And the reason he wouldn't is because when it comes to Biden and Trump and politics and shtuyot in the world, it's not about emet, it's not about what's true and right, it's about me winning. That's the ultimate goal. Therefore, if you're going to lose, regardless if that's a good question or not a good question against your position, I'm not going to help you out there. But in Torah, lahavdil, a million, a trillion, I can't even say a number, it's completely unrelated to that entire phenomena that we find in the world. When it comes to Torah, it's only about finding what is the truth, what is Hashem's word, what is the Chokhmah of Hashem, what does Hashem want from us. So Rava had one way of explaining this machloket Tanaim. This is what these great rabbis were really arguing about in terms of what's the ultimate halacha. Ula had a different way of explaining it. There was a question posed against Ula, and Rava knew an answer for Ula's position. No problem. Of course Rava's going to step in, because if I know an answer to resolve your position, I'm going to speak up. It doesn't allow me to usurp your position and place myself on top of you. That's not the point. The point is, what's the ultimate truth? And if this question is not ultimately a good question against you, of course I'm going to answer up for you, because Torah is emet. Let's continue. Amar Rav of Anivarisha b'chaburo. Hopefully you're still holding with a question. So the question we have against Ula is the distinction made in the Braita that the Chachamim say if it's a monetary case of motzi shemer, you need 3 judges. If it's capital, you need 23. According to Ula, there's no such distinction because from the beginning we're concerned about laws. Maybe witnesses will show up later based on the rumors. You should always need 23. So Amar Rav ani v'arisha b'chabura, I and the lion of the chabura, means the most mighty of the group. Targimna explain this Braita to resolve the position of Ula. Umanu, who is the Arisha B'Chabura? Who is this person, this great rabbi? Rabbi Chia bar Avin. So I and Rabbi Chia bar Avin answered like the following. Hacha b'may askinan. What is the case that the Braita is illustrating that you would need 3 verses 23 as follows. She'evia bal edim shezinta. Again, the husband shows up in court with witnesses claiming that she was mizaneh. Now, as we said, if witnesses show up saying she was mizaneh, that's a capital case because she might be chayab mita. And what's going to happen now is you'll have to have a court of 23. But then, so there's 23 judges that have been gathered. You have now witnesses testifying against her that she was mizaneh. Ve'hevi ha'av edim. But the father brought witnesses, the father of the bride brought witnesses. Ve'hezimum le'edei abal, and they were mazim. They contradicted, but in a specific way, the witnesses of the husband. Now, what is hazama? So this is discussed at length in Masechet Makot. There is a halacha as follows. If 2 groups of witnesses show up in court and they both propose testimony and it's contradictory, that's called ereach chasha. That's contradictory testimony. Now, ereach chasha basically cancels out, they're both thrown out of court. But there's a different halacha called edei hazama. Hazama is where one group shows up in court and testifies about whatever the case that's ongoing is related to. A second group shows up and says to the first group, it's very nice what you testified about, but you could not have possibly known that testimony because imanu ayitem, you were with us on the day and the time that you're claiming you saw that testimony. So you could not possibly know the reality of what you're testifying about. Now there's a very interesting chidush. When it comes to this type of contradiction or diminishment of the initial testimony, the first group of witnesses is knocked out, they're removed from testifying, and actually whatever they were trying, we incur on the first pair of witnesses whatever penalty would have been leveled against the person they were testifying against, which means we trust the second pair, we negate the first pair, and the first pair is punished with whatever punishment they were trying to level against that person they were testifying against. So the father brought witnesses against the witnesses of the husband that said, you 2 witnesses could not possibly know she was mizaneh on that day you're claiming she was because you were with us. Now what this does now is it pulls the rug out of from under the feet of the first pair of witnesses and it negates them. So now what happens? What happens is the husband, because he brought false witnesses, he had paid these guys off, or they were doing him a favor, either way, they were edei hazama. What ends up happening now is it flips back to him being the criminal here. Now, if he's the criminal, so he has to pay 100 shekel to the father, like we spoke out before. So now what happens is, once those witnesses are contradicted, now we have the edim of the supporting the father. Now we have the father claiming money from the husband, actually, the penalty against him. So this is where 3 witnesses comes into discussion. Baligvot mamon mi baal, when the father of the bride comes to claim the penalty that's leveled against the husband who had brought false witnesses, that's bishlosha. That's only with 3 judges, Meaning, this is a separate court case. The first court case perhaps was capital because the husband was claiming he had witnesses, but once those witnesses are negated, now you have a separate discussion. Before the husband was claiming against the other side, now it's the other side claiming against the husband. This is a separate discussion. Now that it's a separate discussion, it's a monetary case. Husband owes father-in-law, or perhaps ex-father-in-law at this point probably, he owes him 100 shekel. So that's a court case that the Braita was telling us is adjudicated with 3 as it relates to motzi shemra, because that's a monetary case. But if it was a regular case where the husband comes in claiming, this is all again in the position of Ula, where the husband is claiming that the woman was mizaneh, meaning he says that she was a be'ula, not a betula. She wasn't a virgin. So as Ula said, the Rabbanan are chayish, they're concerned about witnesses coming in the future, and therefore, Besrim Vishlosha, you would need 23 capital case To judge this, you would need a group of 23 judges in order to adjudicate it. So therefore, Rava answers for Ula is when we say 3, what it's really talking about is the claim of the father-in-law, the father of the bride, to get his penalty that needs to be paid to him. That would require just 3 witnesses. That's what the Chachamim are saying, because that's purely monetary. Whereas a regular claim, since the rabbis, according to Chachamim, according to Ula, are concerned about laws, maybe other witnesses. So you need 23 to start out with, because it could turn into a capital case. Beautiful. So we've answered up this Braita, explained it according to Rav, explained it according to Ula as well. Excellent. Okay. Let's continue. Rashi just points out of your interesting point. He says, in this case, even though 23 people perhaps gathered together initially, we're not worried necessarily about the honor of the original ones. Because in such a case, this is a new court case. It's looked at as an entirely new adjudication. So therefore, that's nothing to be concerned about altogether. Now let's continue. So far we have 2 explanations of this debate. Now we're going to move on to the 3rd explanation, which is Abaye. Abaye explains like this. Abaye says, really, everyone, both Reb Meir and the Rabbanan, would be concerned about laws, which means we would be concerned 2 witnesses might show up claiming that they had testimony that she was mezaneh. Also, everyone would be concerned about the original witnesses, the original judges going home. It would be disrespectful. So what's the point of debate? The point of debate is, how detailed does testimony need to be? This is going to be the point of debates. Abaye says like this. Everybody really holds, even Rabbi Meir holds, we're concerned about the rumor spreading, witnesses showing up, turning this into a capital case. We're also concerned about the honor of the original ones, which means if you had 23 judges initially, it wouldn't be appropriate to send them home. So what's the point of debate? The debate here is that the witnesses showed up in court. He brought witnesses claiming that they had warned her, don't be mezaneh, because that's what will be necessary for her to be chayav mita. In general, that's why it's hard to put somebody to death in court, because in order to put them to death, there have to be witnesses about the crime committed, and those witnesses also need to warn them in a very particular way. If you do it, it's an aveira. If you do this, you're going to be chayav mita. But now we have a machloket as follows. Do the witnesses actually have to say the particular death that would be administered in order for it to be an effective warning to put them to death later? Or do we say, just saying you'll be put to death is a sufficient warning? This is going to be the machloket Reb Meir and the Rabbanan. So let's see. The case is, says Abaye, that the Eidim had warned her stam. Meaning they had said, if you are going to be mezaneh during this period of kiddushin, you'll be chayav mita, death, but not that they didn't say particularly skila. And it is based on the following Braita. The Tanya, as the Braita teaches, this Braita is talking about a mesit. A mesit is a person who goes convincing others to do avodah zarah. Because of the severity of that crime, you don't need the general requirements to put this fellow to death. And one of those things, he doesn't have to be warned. If he's doing this, he can be put to death without the normal precursor, the pre-step, the steps before to put him to death. But the Braita continues there and it says, V'shar kol chayavei mitot shebetorah, other people who are put to death because of their crimes in the Torah, ein memitinotam, you cannot put them to death, ela be'eda. First of all, you need a court of 23, capital court. Ve'edim, you also need witnesses who saw the crime. Ve'hatra'a, now you also have to have warning, that those witnesses gave warning to these people engaged in the crime. Ve'ad sheyodi'u she'u chayav mita. And it also has to be that included in the warning wasn't just that you're doing a avera, but that you're doing an avera that will be resulting in a punishment of death. Now, according to this Tanakama, she'u chayav mita bebeitin, that the warning is sufficient as long as it's a warning that you are doing something that will be chayav mita in court. You don't have to say necessarily the type of death that will be administered. But Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheyodi'uhu be'ezeh mita u'ne'erag. It's only considered a sufficient warning to actually administer later if the witness is told the person committing the avera what death would actually be administered. So now let's explain. Abaye says, what's the case over here of debate? Everyone agrees we're concerned about laws, we're concerned about Vodan Shel Rishonim. So what's the point of machloket here? Husband shows up in court and he claims that he has witnesses that she was mezana. The Eidim show up in court. Now this is very important. There's Rashi in Masechet Rashi in Masechet Baba Kama and Tzadi Amud Bet explains they didn't yet gather a court of 23 because otherwise this doesn't really make sense. They only had gathered a court of 3, let's say. Gathered a court of 3. Witnesses show up and they say, we warned her that if she's mezaneh, this is during the Kiddushin, she'll be put to death. But we didn't say that she'll be chayav skila. So like this, the Rabbanan hold, like the position of the Rabbanan in this Braita that we just quoted. That's a sufficient warning. Since that's a sufficient warning, this is a capital case. So you'll now have to gather 23 judges in order to adjudicate this, because this is a real case of nefashot. The warning's sufficient, death could be administered, you need 23 judges. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yehuda. In order for it to be an effective edim atra'ah, it has to be a particular warning. You'll be put to death with skila. They didn't say that. So therefore you can't put her to death in this case. Since you can't put her to death, you can remain with the court of 3 that is already present in front of you, because essentially this is not going to be a capital case. This is going to be a purely monetary case. Now there's a very important Rashi explains something over here. We said that we're concerned about laws and we're concerned about Kvodan Shel Rishonim. Now regarding Kvodan Shel Rishonim, I just told you, Rashi in Baba Kama says the way this answer makes sense is that they hadn't yet gathered 23. Because if they had already gathered 23, we'd have to say that they would stay. So they only had gathered 3. The question is, you have to add the other 20. Fine. But what about the other issue? Laws. Maybe the rumor will spread, and then you'll have witnesses show up. It'll turn into a capital case. If Rabbi Meir agrees to that according to Abaye, so why shouldn't you need 23 to start out with? So the answer, as Rashi explains here, is a very interesting chiluk, and this is how Abaye holds. If the husband would just show up in court and say, I want to administer a case against her, she's a bitula. She wasn't a bitula, she was a bi'ula. She was not a virgin girl. In such a case, Rabbi Meir would hold, we are concerned maybe witnesses would show up. But in a case where he shows up with witnesses already, and those are proven to be inconsequential witnesses, because according to Rabbi Meir, their warning was not sufficient. So therefore what happens is, now we say, if these witnesses are not sufficient, we don't have to concern ourselves about future witnesses as well. So we're no longer concerned about laws. That's how Rashi explains over here. And therefore, Rabbi Meir says, we don't have to be concerned about that, since this is now not a capital case anymore. All you need is 3 witnesses, 3 judges, not 23. That's the position of Abaye explaining the debate. Now, Rav Papa is the 4th and final explanation of the date today. Rav Papa essentially says, like Abaye, both Rav Meir and the Rabbanan hold that we're concerned about laws, we're concerned this matter may spread and then witnesses will come in making it into a capital case, and we're concerned about judges going home, will be disrespectful. But Rav Papa explains the machloket in a little bit of a different way with a twist. Rav Papa says like this, we know the idea of hatra'ah, of warning in general, is so that people who are about to commit a crime know that they're doing the wrong thing. It means we have to be able to determine that when you go and do that averah, you know that that's the wrong thing to do. You're doing it b'mezid nonetheless, then you'll be chayav the punishment. If you're doing it intentionally, nonetheless, you'll be chayav to that punishment. Which is why it's very difficult to put people to death in court, because we're talking about someone who was just warned that this is wrong, and he goes ahead and does it anyways. But says the 4th explanation of Papa, there is a position who holds, since the purpose of hatra'ah is to tell somebody what you're about to do is wrong, so if it's a learned person, they don't even need hatra'ah. They don't need warning, because they know it's wrong already. So this is going to be the point of contention. Does a learned person, someone that's considered chaver or eshet chaver, as we're about to see, require hatra'ah? Do we say since they're learned, they know it's wrong, they don't even need it, and they can still be chayav without the warning? Or do we say they also need it? That's the point of debate here. So let's see that inside. Rav Papa Amar Papa says like this, Achabi Isha Chavera Askinan. Witnesses showed up and said, we saw the crime that was committed, but we did not warn her about the crime that she was about to do, in this case being mizaneh, because she's eshet chavera. She is a learned woman. That's the point. As Rashi explains over here, the husband brought these witnesses in, and they said they didn't warn her because she was learned already. The kamifligi beplukted Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda v'Rabbanan, and this will be a machloket Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are going to hold, the Chachamim are going to hold, like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, that it's sufficient. In such a case, that's a sufficient testimony. You can assume that she knew what she was doing was wrong, and you could prosecute her, which is why you'll need a court of 23. But Rabbi Meir holds like the Rabbanan, it's not sufficient, and therefore, since she didn't get warning, this is a monetary case, not a capital case. Tanya, as the Braita explains, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer, Chaver, when it comes to a learned person, Ein tzarich hatra'ah, there's no requirement to have hatra'ah in order to prosecute him later. Because the only purpose of warning was to distinguish, is the person committing this Aveirah aware that he's now doing the Aveirah b'mezid intentionally and not b'shogeg unintentionally. So therefore, says Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, if it's a learned person, he doesn't even require it because he knows it's wrong and he's going to do it anyways. There are exceptions to this rule. But what's going to come out now, what will emerge is as follows, according to this fourth answer of Papa. The witnesses showed up and said, we saw her do the crime of being mezanah after Kiddushin, but we didn't give warning because she's learned. The Chachamim hold like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, that's sufficient. She knew better. She could be prosecuted now as dinei nefashot, and you need a court of 23. However, Rabbi Meir will hold like the Rabbanan, that's not sufficient. Therefore, this is purely a monetary case, and only 3 is necessary for adjudicating this case. Now we're going to stop here at the bottom of Chet Amud Bet. We'll continue on tomorrow with Tet Amud Aleph. We had 4 explanations of the machloket today, and we'll pick up tomorrow, continuing on with these explanations of Rabbi Meir and Rav Chachamim's machloket regarding this case of motzi shemra. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day. All the best.